Marcus Ellis stood frozen in his study doorway, watching his wife Vivian glide through their Palo Alto mansion in silk pajamas. Her phone pressed to her ear as she whispered in French to someone named Mon Chéri, promising to meet them in Monaco next week, the same week she'd told him she'd be visiting her sick mother in Portland. The revelation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. For 3 years of marriage, he'd believed Vivian's story completely. She was the enigmatic fashion designer who'd captured his heart at a charity gala, the woman who preferred shadows to spotlights, who declined every social invitation with a gentle smile and claimed she valued their privacy above all else. While other tech billionaires' wives graced magazine covers and hosted lavish parties, Vivian Ellis remained a mystery, and Marcus had loved her for it. But standing there in the hallway, listening to her sultry voice promise expensive gifts and exotic getaways to some unknown lover, Marcus felt his world tilting off its axis. The French phrases rolled off her tongue with an intimacy he'd never heard in their conversations. His wife, who claimed to speak only basic French from college courses, was fluent, and she was using that fluency to seduce someone else. Marcus retreated to his study, his hands shaking as he pulled up their joint credit card statements on his laptop. What he found made his blood run cold. Private jet rentals to Milan, Cape Town, Tokyo cities Vivian had never mentioned visiting, luxury hotel suites booked for two, expensive gifts from Cartier, Hermes, and boutiques he'd never heard of. The dates corresponded perfectly with her supposed business trips and family visits. His mind raced through the past year, connecting dots he'd been blind to before. The new lingerie that never made appearances in their bedroom, the sudden interest in learning about wine regions she claimed were for her design inspiration, the way she'd started working out with a personal trainer, transforming her already beautiful body into something more sculpted, more deliberately seductive. Marcus opened his laptop and began searching deeper. Vivian had been careful, but not careful enough. He found Instagram posts from young men in various cities, handsome 20-something models and artists who posted photos from the exact locations and dates that matched their credit card statements. The captions were cryptic but telling. Lucky to have such a generous patron. Milano dreams come true when someone believes in your art enough to change your life. The pattern became clear. Vivian wasn't just having affairs, she was running a sophisticated operation, maintaining multiple relationships with younger men across the globe. She was their sugar mama, their benefactor, their secret, and Marcus, with his billions and his genuine love for her, was merely her home base, her cover story, her unwitting financier dot. As he scrolled through months of evidence, Marcus felt something deeper than betrayal. He felt foolish. How had he missed the signs? How had the man who'd built a tech empire through careful analysis and pattern recognition failed so completely to see what was happening in his own home? Vivian had played him perfectly, using his respect for her privacy against him, turning his trust into a weapon that had blinded him to her deception. That night, Marcus lay awake beside his sleeping wife, watching her peaceful face in the moonlight, and wondering who she really was beneath the mask she'd worn so convincingly. Tomorrow, he would confront her. Tomorrow, everything would change. Marcus waited until Vivian finished her morning yoga routine, timing his approach when she was most relaxed, most vulnerable. She stood in their sunlit kitchen, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, pouring herself green tea with the same graceful movements that had first enchanted him. She looked up as he entered, offering that soft smile that had once made his heart skip. "We need to talk," Marcus said, placing his laptop on the marble island between them. "About your trips, about the men, about the lies." For just a moment, a fraction of a second, he saw something flicker across Vivian's face. Surprise, fear, but then her expression smoothed into one of gentle confusion, her head tilting slightly as if she were trying to understand a foreign language. "What men, darling?" she asked, her voice carrying that familiar French accent that now sounded calculated rather than charming. "What lies? You're scaring me." Marcus turned the laptop toward her, showing her the credit card statements, the Instagram posts, the evidence he'd compiled through sleepless hours. "These charges, Vivian, Milan, Cape Town, Tokyo. You told me you were visiting your mother. attending design conferences. But I found them, the men you're sponsoring. Vivian's eyes widened, and she set down her teacup with a delicate clink. Marcus, mon amour, I'm worried about you. You've been working so hard lately, so stressed. These charges, yes, I traveled for inspiration, for my work. But men? What men are you talking about? She moved around the island toward him, her voice taking on a concerned, almost maternal tone. Show me these men you think exist. Marcus pulled up the Instagram profiles, pointing to the photos, the dates, the locations that matched perfectly with her travels. But as he spoke, as he laid out his evidence, Vivian's expression grew increasingly worried, not guilty, but concerned for his mental state. Darling, she said softly, placing a cool hand on his cheek, these are just beautiful places, beautiful people. You're connecting dots that don't exist. Are you sleeping? Have you been taking your medication? Marcus stepped back, confused. He wasn't taking any medication. Vivian, the evidence is right here. The timing, the locations, the expenses, evidence of what? She interrupted gently. That I travel for work, that I appreciate art and culture. Marcus, you're starting to sound paranoid. This isn't like you. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her photos with practiced ease. Look, here are my work meetings in Milan. Here's the design conference in Cape Town. Tokyo was for the textile exhibition, remember? I told you about the innovative silk techniques. As she showed him the photos, Marcus felt his certainty wavering. The images showed her at professional events, in design studios, meeting with clients. Where were the young men? Where was the evidence of seduction and manipulation? But the Instagram posts, Marcus insisted. The men thanking their generous patron. Vivian looked at the posts again, her brow furrowing. Darling, these are just artists sharing their work. This one is thanking a gallery owner. This one is talking about a grant he received. You're seeing connections that aren't there. The doubt crept into Marcus's mind like poison. Had he misread everything? Had his stress from work, from the pressures of running his company, finally caught up with him? Vivian's explanations seemed reasonable, logical. Her concern for his well-being felt genuine. Maybe you should talk to someone, she suggested, softly. Dr. Peterson helped you so much during the merger stress. This level of suspicion, these elaborate theories, it's not healthy, Marcus. I'm worried about you. Over the following weeks, Vivian's concern for Marcus's mental health became a constant presence in their home. She'd find him staring at his laptop, analyzing credit card statements, and she'd gently suggest he step away from work. When he mentioned the discrepancies in her travel stories, she'd nod sympathetically and remind him that stress could play tricks on memory. Remember when you thought Jana from accounting was stealing from the company? She'd say, referring to an incident from 2 years prior where Marcus's suspicions had indeed been unfounded. Your brilliant mind sometimes sees patterns that aren't there when you're overwhelmed. Marcus began seeing Dr. Peterson again, at Vivian's gentle insistence. In therapy, he found himself describing his suspicions about his wife's affairs, and even as he spoke, the words sounded increasingly paranoid. Dr. Peterson, a kind man in his 60s, listened with professional concern. Marcus, you're describing a very elaborate scenario, Dr. Peterson said during one session. Multiple lovers across different continents. Sophisticated deception. These are the kind of suspicions that often arise from work stress and trust issues. How are things at home otherwise? Good, Marcus admitted. Vivian's been incredibly supportive. She's been cooking my favorite meals, making sure I get enough sleep. She even canceled her upcoming work trips to stay home with me. That sounds like the behavior of a caring, concerned wife, Dr. Peterson observed. Not someone leading a double life. At home, Vivian had indeed transformed into the perfect caregiver. She made him chamomile tea before bed, encouraged him to meditate, even suggested they take a romantic vacation together, just the two of them, no work, no distractions. She was attentive, loving, present in ways she hadn't been during their marriage. But sometimes, late at night, Marcus would catch glimpses of something else. A quick, satisfied smile when she thought he wasn't looking. The way she'd glance at her phone with barely concealed excitement, before remembering to look concerned about his condition. The slight pause before she'd launch into her worried wife routine. "I've been thinking," she said one evening as they sat by the fireplace. "Maybe we should have Dr. Peterson explain to you how stress can create false memories. It might help you understand what's happening." Marcus looked at her, noting how she'd positioned herself in the lamplight to look particularly vulnerable and caring. "False memories? Yes, darling. Sometimes when we're under pressure, our minds can create elaborate stories to explain feelings of anxiety or insecurity. It's not your fault, it's just how the brain protects itself." She reached for his hand, her touch cool and soft. "I love you, Marcus. I would never hurt you the way you think I have. But I'm starting to worry that these delusions might get worse if we don't address them properly." Delusions. The word hung in the air between them. Marcus felt his grip on reality starting to slip. Was he delusional? Had he constructed an elaborate fantasy about his wife's infidelity? The evidence he'd found now seemed circumstantial, explainable. Vivian's presence, her care, her unwavering concern for his well-being, it all felt so real, so genuine. "Maybe you're right," he heard himself saying. "Maybe I need more help than I thought." Vivian smiled, and for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw triumph flash in her eyes. But when he looked again, there was only love and concern. "We'll get through this together," she promised, squeezing his hand. "I'll take care of you." As she spoke, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it quickly, then set it aside without reading it fully. But Marcus had caught a glimpse of the preview. "Miss you. Mon amour. When can you come to—" "What was that?" he asked. Vivian looked confused. "What was what?" "The text message. I saw it all. That was probably just a work email," she said dismissively. "You know how the international clients text at all hours?" Marcus stared at her, feeling the familiar spiral of doubt and certainty warring in his mind. Had he seen what he thought he'd seen? Was his mind playing tricks on him again? Dr. Peterson's diagnosis was delivered with clinical precision: stress-induced paranoid ideation, with possible elements of delusional thinking. The recommended treatment included therapy, meditation, and a temporary reduction in work responsibilities. Vivian sat beside Marcus in the doctor's office, her hand resting supportively on his arm as Dr. Peterson explained how successful executives often developed elaborate suspicions about those closest to them. "It's more common than you'd think," Dr. Peterson assured them. "The same analytical skills that make someone successful in business can sometimes turn inward, creating complex theories about betrayal or deception where none exist." Marcus found himself nodding along, accepting the diagnosis even as part of his mind screamed in protest. The evidence he'd collected now sat in a folder on his laptop, labeled "Stress Delusions." At Vivian's suggestion, she'd convinced him to show everything to Dr. Peterson, who had calmly explained how confirmation bias could make innocent coincidences appear sinister. "You see a beautiful young man in Tokyo posting about his good fortune," Dr. Peterson had said, "and because you're already anxious about your wife's travels, you connect it to her trip. But this man could be talking about anything: a job, a scholarship, a family inheritance. At home, Vivian had taken on the role of devoted caregiver with apparent ease. She worked from home now, claiming she wanted to keep an eye on his mental state. She prepared healthy meals, scheduled his medications, and even started joining him for his therapy sessions. When Dr. Peterson suggested couples counseling might be beneficial, "I want to understand what I might have done to trigger these fears," she told Dr. Peterson during one joint session. "Marcus is the love of my life. If my behavior somehow contributed to his anxiety, I need to know." Watching her perform, because that's what it was, Marcus realized with crystal clarity during these moments, was like watching a master class in psychological manipulation. She had an answer for everything, a concerned expression ready for every question, a loving gesture to accompany every doubt. But the performance had cracks. Marcus began paying attention in ways he never had before, not to gather evidence of affairs, but to understand the woman he'd married. He noticed how she never received calls when he was around anymore, how her phone was always face down, how she'd developed a habit of taking long baths with her device, claiming the steam helped her skin. He noticed how she'd begun steering conversations away from certain topics her family, whom he'd never actually met, Her past relationships, which she claimed were too painful to discuss, and her work, which had become mysteriously busy with confidential projects. Most tellingly, he noticed how she reacted when he stopped bringing up his suspicions. Instead of relief, she seemed almost disappointed, as if she'd enjoyed the game of making him doubt himself. "How are you feeling about your delusions?" she asked one evening, the word delusions rolling off her tongue with what Marcus now recognized as barely concealed satisfaction. "Better," he lied. "The therapy is helping." "Good," she said. But he caught that flash of something annoyance across her face. "Though Dr. Peterson says these things can resurface during times of stress, we need to stay vigilant." That night, Marcus lay awake listening to Vivian's breathing, wondering who she really was beneath the carefully constructed persona. He thought about the woman he'd fallen in love with, mysterious, elusive, private. Had those qualities been red flags disguised as romantic intrigue? His phone buzzed softly with a work email, and as he reached for it in the dark, he saw Vivian's phone light up beside her. The notification preview was visible for just a moment. "Darling V, I can't wait to see you in Paris next month. The apartment is perfect for..." Marcus held his breath, waiting to see if she'd wake up and check the message, but Vivian slept on, a small smile playing at her lips as if she were having pleasant dreams about someone who wasn't her husband. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt his sanity return with sharp clarity. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't paranoid. He was married to a woman who had gaslight him so expertly that she'd convinced not only him, but his therapist that his accurate perceptions were symptoms of mental illness. The question now was, what was he going to do about it? Marcus didn't confront Vivian this time. Instead, he became a student of her methods. Watching with the same analytical precision he applied to business problems, he began to understand that his wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was a professional manipulator, someone who had turned deception into an art form. Over the next month, he played the role of the recovering paranoid husband perfectly. He took his prescribed anxiety medication, which he began palming instead of swallowing, attended therapy sessions where he discussed his progress, and thanked Vivian regularly for her patience and support. Meanwhile, he conducted his real investigation with the skills that had made him a billionaire: careful planning, resource allocation, and professional help. He hired a discreet private investigation firm that specialized in international cases, providing them with Vivian's travel patterns and financial information. He also retained a forensic accountant to trace money flows he might have missed. The results were staggering. Vivian Ellis wasn't just maintaining relationships with multiple men, she was running what amounted to a luxury escort service for herself, with Marcus as her unwitting financier. The private investigators had documented her activities across 7 cities, with 5 different young men who believed they were her exclusive partner. She'd rented apartments in Milan, Cape Town, and Tokyo under shell companies she'd created, using his business resources. But the most devastating discovery was how systematically she'd been stealing from him. The forensic accountant found evidence of cryptocurrency transfers, offshore accounts, and investment purchases made in her name using funds from their joint accounts. She'd siphoned nearly $2 million over their 3-year marriage. "She's been planning this for a long time," the lead investigator, Sarah Chen, told him during their final meeting. "The way she's structured everything, the psychological manipulation, the careful documentation of your mental health issues, this isn't opportunistic cheating. This is professional fraud." Marcus absorbed this information with surprising calm. The rage he'd expected to feel was overshadowed by a strange sense of relief. He wasn't crazy. His instincts had been correct. The woman he'd married was a predator who had targeted him specifically for his wealth and his trusting nature. "There's something else," Sarah continued, sliding a folder across the table. "We found evidence that you're not her first husband. There was a tech entrepreneur in Seattle, divorced 2 years ago under similar circumstances. He was convinced he was having a nervous breakdown when she left him. Took half his assets in the settlement." The folder contained photos, financial records, and medical documentation showing the Seattle husband's journey through therapy for stress-induced paranoid delusions. The pattern was identical: the gaslighting, the concerned wife routine, the gradual theft of assets. And finally, the dissolution of the marriage, with Vivian positioned as the long-suffering spouse of a mentally unstable man. That evening, Vivian announced she'd be traveling to Paris for a design consultation, a trip that would last 2 weeks. As she packed her designer luggage, chattering about fabric markets and inspiration, Marcus watched her with new eyes. Every gesture, every word was calculated to maintain her cover story. "Are you sure you'll be all right without me?" she asked, her voice layered with what he now recognized as false concern. "I can cancel if you're not feeling stable. I'll be fine," Marcus assured her. "Dr. Peterson thinks some time apart might be good for my recovery. Help me practice managing anxiety." Independently, Vivian's smile was radiant. "You're getting so much better, darling. I'm proud of you." As he drove her to the airport, Marcus felt a strange peace settling over him. For months, he'd questioned his own sanity, doubted his perceptions, and allowed someone else to define his reality. But now, armed with the truth, he could finally see clearly. "Have a wonderful trip," he said, kissing her goodbye at the departure gate. "I will," she replied, and for once, he believed her completely. After all, she had no idea it would be her last trip as Mrs. Marcus Ellis. While Vivian was in Paris, presumably with her latest conquest, Marcus set his plan in motion with the methodical precision that had built his empire. He worked with a team of lawyers to secure all joint assets, filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, and had the private investigation evidence sealed by court order pending the proceedings. But Marcus's masterstroke was turning Vivian's own weapon against her. When she returned from Paris, glowing with satisfaction and carrying gifts she claimed were inspiration pieces from French designers, she found Marcus in his study with Dr. Peterson and a court-appointed psychiatrist. "Darling," she said, her voice immediately shifting to concern as she took in the scene. "What's happening? Are you having another episode?" Dr. Peterson, who had been thoroughly briefed on the investigation findings, spoke first. "Vivian, we need to discuss some concerning behavior patterns that have come to light during Marcus's recovery." Marcus watched his wife's face as the psychiatrist presented the evidence methodically: the financial theft, the multiple relationships, the systematic gaslighting. Her expression cycled through confusion, hurt, indignation, and finally, a cold calculation that Marcus recognized as her true face. "This is absurd," she said, but her performance lacked its usual conviction. "Marcus, you know how your mind works when you're stressed. You're creating elaborate fantasies again." "Actually," Dr. Peterson interjected, "the evidence suggests that Marcus's perceptions were accurate all along. What he experienced wasn't paranoid ideation, it was the natural response of someone being systematically manipulated and gaslight." The room fell silent as Vivian processed this reversal. For the first time since Marcus had known her, she seemed genuinely off balance, unsure of her next move. "Mrs. Ellis," the court-appointed psychiatrist said gently, "we'd like to discuss your own psychological patterns, the systematic nature of your deception, the financial manipulation, the apparent lack of empathy for your husband's distress. These suggest certain personality disorders that we should address." Marcus almost felt sorry for her as he watched the tables turn completely. The concerned wife routine that had served her so well was now being reframed as calculated manipulation. Her expressions of love and care were being analyzed as symptoms of antisocial behavior. "I think," Vivian said slowly, her accent thickening as it always did when she was truly emotional, "that I need to call my lawyer." "Of course," Marcus said, speaking for the first time since she'd entered the room. "Though you should know that the accounts you've been using to fund your lifestyle have been frozen pending the divorce proceedings." The mask slipped completely then. The soft, caring expression Vivian had worn throughout their marriage disappeared, replaced by something hard and calculating. "You think you're so clever," she said, her voice stripped of its usual honeyed tones, "but you have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," Marcus replied calmly, "I do now. That's the difference." 3 months later, Vivian Ellis was on a plane to Monaco, her legal fees paid by the liquidation of assets she'd managed to hide in offshore accounts. The divorce settlement had been remarkably clean. She kept what she'd stolen and earned before their marriage, and Marcus kept everything else. including his sanity and his self-trust. Marcus returned to his work with renewed focus and a hard-earned wisdom about the difference between privacy and secrecy, between mystery and deception. He never married again, but he dated openly, honestly, and with the confidence of someone who had learned to trust his own instincts. Dr. Peterson later published a paper on psychological manipulation in marriages, using Marcus's case with permission and anonymity as an example of how intelligent, successful people could become victims of systematic gaslighting. The paper won awards and helped other victims recognize similar patterns in their own relationships. As for Vivian, Marcus heard through social media that she'd found her next target, a pharmaceutical executive in Geneva who was apparently charmed by her mysterious, private nature. Marcus briefly considered warning the man, but decided that some lessons had to be learned the hard way. Sometimes, late at night in his quiet house, Marcus wondered if Vivian had ever felt anything genuine for him, or if every moment of their marriage had been performance. But those thoughts no longer kept him awake or sent him spiraling into self-doubt. He had learned the most valuable lesson of his life, the difference between questioning reality and having reality question for you. When someone you trust systematically undermines your perception of reality, making you doubt your own experiences and instincts. How do you distinguish between genuine self-reflection and psychological manipulation? What would you do if you discovered that your most intimate relationship was built entirely on deception, designed to exploit your vulnerabilities?